we had a look at what is happening at the Swiss level, local, let's say the region, and then the federation, so the country level. Now we are going outside of Switzerland in order to see which are the best practices we can learn from in order to improve sustainability also in Switzerland, who is already doing quite well. So we will have a look at Peru with our next speaker, Adin Gavazzi. Then we will go to the European level with Mr. Dominioni, up to the world level with Eugene Zhou from ICROM. So our first speaker is Adin. Please, you can come on stage. Adin, she is an architect by education, but then she has done a lot in many other fields, and now she is focusing on well-being, healing, and she is the co-founder of a UNESCO chair with which we collaborate a lot. The title of the UNESCO chair is Anthropology of Health, so very much concerned with health and well-being. So Adin, she worked several years at the World Heritage Site of Machu Picchu, and she is speaking about that today. Also, she worked there with Heinz Planger, from whom you have seen beautiful, wonderful pictures. You will see more. Adin.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, MDPI, for this beautiful gathering of the like-minded. Thank you to the UNESCO chair of the University of Lugano, Lorenzo, Silvia, Anna, the entire group. Thank you to our sponsors being here today, helping us new researches that are being shared, of which you will know about in the future. I was invited here today to talk to you about issues on Machu Picchu. And as I was a very young researcher in the Andes, I very quickly learned that if you have the humility and the strength to work among mountain people and among forests, you don't talk about issues, you talk about solutions. Because I am alone here in front of you, but I am talking to you today next to many others who are not here physically, but it's thanks to them if this incredibly famous World Heritage Site still stands and still teaches too many, maybe too many tourists at the time, learning something about forest civilization. We work in forest civilizations because we understand that forest civilization healed and developed healthy lifestyles throughout millennia. And as Western society, sometimes we figure out we're not well at all. And our well-being needs to learn something from other civilizations on the world. So we go on World Heritage Sites to train scientists, heritage scientists, to teach them about universal values, explaining to them about criterias, and telling them that the real narrative, the authenticity of the narrative, is not the projection that they receive from the pressure of the world. It is the heritage itself. So when we talk about sustainable narrative, what kind of story are we telling? What kind of message and storytelling are we giving to the thousands and thousands of tourists who run towards Machu Picchu because they dream about Hiram Bingham, because they saw Indiana Jones, because one day they want to feel the feel of the lost city of the Incas, which never was. So what kind of narratives, as scientists, do we build up for them? As you see here, the very first image of Machu Picchu that I'm showing you is not exactly the traditional image every one of us has in mind. It's an incredible chain of mountains, very closely related to astronomical rules, elements which ultimately conjure up the design of an incredible network of buildings, terraces, paths, which define a giant landscape of 37,000 hectares. This is really not the lost city of the Incas. This is a giant landscape, populated by buildings for which we don't even have names in Western languages, because the geometry that generates them doesn't have the terms to define what sort of semi-spiral angled whatever building we have in front of us, yet we all understand it's sacred. We all feel the memory of all those who cut every single lithic animal with immense effort, building up giant and beautiful spaces, ceremonial spaces, of which we don't know enough, for which we don't even have words, and for which as scientists we're called to generate credible and authentic narratives. So are we ready to challenge all we know about our words, our languages, to generate a story that is respectful of the memory of the builders, and at the same time is simple, authentic, honest, and correct enough to talk to those who come infected with the wrong dream? And this is a big step for us, because what are we looking at? For instance, right now you're looking at the temple of a condor. It's called condor because it has two giant elements that become wings that are in fact natural emergences of the rock. And the Incas, all they did was piece together and just slender those wings further on towards the sky. But at the same time, you're looking on the floor at the projection of a head of a condor with a white collar. So is this a sculpture? Is it a building? Is it 3D? Is it 2D? What is it? It's part of a very complex sacred space, which was defined and organized and built up to recreate a harmonic way of living between the high Andes, the Amazon, and the population who inhabited the area. We, as Westerns, become fascinated by the fact that nature has the ability to generate a cosmovision. But those who are born within this incredible biodiversity don't think of it as strange. That is a balance. It's a balance of the inhabiting the natural world as humans, with the right space and duty in life, as individuals, as a community. And this type of message, surprisingly, is universal. Because all the tourists who arrive, whom I actually see at 4:30 in the morning queuing up, yawning, incredibly bad mood because they had to stand the worst possible treatment. You know, I heard today about how you treat and cuddle up all your, tourists. And these poor tourists, they arrive in terrible conditions. And many of them spend the night in line just to be the first to enter the Machu Picchu, to have that dream. And, you see them, they're cold and they're in a bad mood and they don't understand what is there. But then you see them coming out after 5, 6, 7, maybe 10 hours of moving around this place that they don't even know about. And they have that typical strange face that you have after a gigantic concert, where you found the greatest happiness. And they don't even know why. They just have a completely different expression and way of moving around the site. Because the site gave them the ability to reconnect nature, human space, and their own selves. So we become fascinated by geometries we don't know about, that as sciences we come to bring back to a rationalized version of knowledge, but at the same time we have to deal with the greater importance, which is how to reconnect people to what is transcendent, which is inherently human. And this is typical not just of Machu Picchu, it's typical of all sacred sites. A few minutes ago in the previous break, we were talking about how people don't understand about sites, and I was commenting that sometimes I find a tourist after 5 hours in the site telling me, where's the bathroom? Where can I go to the toilet? And you know, they're desperate, and I look at them and say, well, would you expect to have a bathroom in St. Peter's Square? And they go, oh no. I say, well, you see, that's the same. And suddenly, by reminding them that the sacredness of space is not just the building, it's not just the human intervention, but it's the togetherness of world. They become aware of this. And they learn to connect to these sites as a whole. As scientists, we study frames, paths, shapes, transitions. We try to find words translating Quechua conceptualizations of space into Western notions. But we have to deal with the Western imagery, with this Indiana Jones who was called Hiram Bingham, who came in 1911 with the equivalent of a moleskin and did a beautiful sketch, which you see here on page 46, which is already flat, because it's the Western projection of a space. And only a couple of years later, this was already published. So it becomes the official version of Machu Picchu, which lasts until 2005. Is this narrative sustainable? Can we sustain our own projection as Western of sacred sites, which have so much to teach to everybody, even to those who don't know about it? We need to reach 2008 to have the first Western technology accepting that this is a three-dimensional planning of a territory that is incredibly complex, combining forests, paths, areas where you stop, areas where you look up, areas where you hide, areas where you are visible. And we have to wait until 2016, just yesterday, technologically wise, to start seeing the world scientifically as it was always imagined and conceived and built up by the Incas. And we catch up with this delay. Through the technology that we have, we try to recreate through drawings, redrawing every single lithic element, connecting the students, the future scientists of heritage, with the intentions of every single builder through every single stone, thereby revealing what is behind the sacred action of constructing a tiny, whiny piece of a temple. Because it is that material memory that becomes the emotional impression of the unaware traveler. And we study the evolution of every single building. We understand different phases. We even understand how the site evolves throughout the building, trying to understand not just as future holders of the knowledge for conservation, but also as storyteller of an authenticity. What is it that we're going to talk about? Because I still have in my ears the whispering of the guides that become very emotional because they have to tell the super story. And so since we do not have one single truth, they have to impress the tourists. So more often than not, I hear the guide saying that these stones were so wonderful because they were not coming from Earth. They were definitely extraterrestrial. And we know very well that this is a granitic chaos that was very slowly and very, willingly built up with incredible effort throughout 70 years of fantastic and gigantic work by the Inca people. But why is it that we have to always, as Western, try to find an incredible explanation? Can't we just say that it's a beautiful monument that is extra-European? No, it has to be extraterrestrial. Because in our mind, we cannot accept the fact that there is another civilization able to teach us something. We do the same analysis and the same work and the same effort on the landscape level because we understand that the life and the cosmovision and the imagination of the Inca world is profoundly intertwined with the entire landscape. So we use LiDAR. And by using it, we reveal many areas that are not yet visible and that are not yet open to the public. And we ask ourselves, how much of this has to remain hidden? How much of this is correct to maintain a secret memory? So our work, technomorphology, does rewrite a narrative throughout a number of actions that are totally scientifical. But at the very end of it, the very most last important faculty it develops is bicognitivism. You are a scientist, but you make the greatest effort to become that intuition which lights up the action of the builder. And then we analyze the result. And these results do help in all the touristic issues. For instance, because of this analysis, we know very well that Machu Picchu was capable to host roughly 400 residents. And in the green open area, on certain occasions, maybe 1,500. And we have 5,000 visitors every day. What do we do? Because of conservation issues, all the clay of all the floors of all the buildings that have no more roofs, otherwise you would lose authenticity, are recreated exactly as the Inca did, with exactly the same tools. Yet, we have too many feet. And the feet don't just consume the spaces they, what can I say? I always promise not to speak badly about such a beautiful site, but this destroys the entire notion of a sacred site. And it ruins that so fundamental experience that those poor people who spend the night in line to have that very special moment. How do we save that? You know, how do we make that real? Because of all these feet, literally the stairways and the steps, the granitic steps, are destroyed. The speed of the destruction is over 1 millimeter per year. So in 10 years, we have 1 centimeter less of one single step, which is gigantic. We just can't do it. Yet the pressure is big. So what do we do if everybody wants to see the yachta, has to do it, wants to do it? So the first idea is divide into circuits. Let people go through specialized circuits. You see, have been designed here. Second idea is generate a site, museum, and centro de interpretación, where people learn about the Inca relationship with the site, the entire part. By the way, we're also implementing Hampimuya, the green areas which you see there, which is an open-air museum connected to medicinal plants. Those of the Incas, those that are still used today, those that are developed by local communities that generate nutraceuticals and biocosmetics, which integrate an interesting offer for tourists. You don't just go to see a site, you go to live the reality of healing in many, many different degrees. And here's part of the work we're realizing. And then in order to concentrate this poor yachta, what we do, we try to open up other paths. Since it never was the lost city of the Incas, it was just one of 60 different sites. We're implementing 10 different routes. 60 different sites. So just imagine if we could take all these 5,000, maybe even have more, and then, spread them around the 37,000 hectares and have them experience the real life of Inca communities moving within the forest, going up and down, reaching small areas. investing money locally, so spreading the amount of money, not creating that terrible knot that attracts distraction and only concentrates money, which ends up being spent in an unsustainable way. But the most important thing we do, which is what has the best effect so far, is ask those who either are really Inca or who have a very profound sensitivity to retell our story. Either because they're famous scientists like Fernando Stete, who lived 30 years working on the monument as an Inca and as an archaeologist and anthropologist, thanks to whom, together with the University of Svizzera Italiana, here you see the old logos because it started a while ago, we had the opportunity to recreate the narrative of a real archaeologist looking at his site with an Inca gaze. And we build up a different narrative by connecting. You see, on the website, the Machu Picchu by Fernando Stete. How many minutes left? 2. Okay. And we generate a narrative which is at the same time scientific, but very profoundly connected with the Inca gaze. We use sustainability in a way that is not as beautiful and elegant as the lotus, of which I was very happy to learn, but that connects culture and nature as an asset with economy and society. And we sit at this table, socially responsible companies like our sponsors, entrepreneurial communities who want to be engaged, rules grantor state like municipalities, and us, the science, quality grantors of science, to define local strategy. We work hand by hand with our ex-pupils now directing the site with the same gaze. And then we ask famous photographers. This is the most famous photography ever made and awarded. It's the first photography ever that considered Machu Picchu not a dead box, but a living entity, where the hairs of the real hairs of the Inca people were still alive. And we're happy to have the author Heinz Plenge here with us, who really helped us with one image to retell the authenticity of this narrative. But this is not the only narrative, because we keep working. And since we're opening up 10 different paths, Heinz Plenge is working with us on a different way of a different entrance of Machu Picchu. And we're prepared to showing not just to this beautiful group we have today, but also to the rest of the world, the majestic complexity of how the network of the Inca planning can become a sacred site and really improve the life, the health, the knowledge, and the awareness of every single tourist. Thank you very much.
It was very, very inspiring, and I then added another piece to the discussion about sustainability, that is sustainability of narratives. So now we go to Europe, and it's my pleasure to introduce you Mr. Stefano Domignoni. So he's the executive secretary of something very long to tell, so I will read, of the Council of Europe Enlarged Partial Agreement on Cultural Roots. But what is important here is the program, Cultural Roots. So the Council of Europe launched this wonderful program that creates, like, put on the landscape, on the touristic landscape, itineraries that federates different countries around specific topics that might be historical figures or might be artistic movements and so on. So the question for Stefano is, but why these cultural roots should be considered sustainable assets for tourism in Europe? Stefano, you've got the answer now.
Yeah, I hope so, yes. Well, first of all, let me thank the Vice Rector of the Università della Svizzera Italiana, Professor Cantoni, Silvia, and Sarah, and all the team, and MDPI for inviting me today to Lugano. It's a pleasure to be here with you and to be back in your wonderful city. I am born and raised in Varese, so we're neighbors, and it's very nice to be in Ticino today. Now, Silvia has mentioned few elements of the cultural roots of the Council of Europe program, and I would like to take the opportunity to give you an overview of what the program is. And I'm happy that Adine presented a heritage site such as Machu Picchu, because what the Cultural Roots program is a collection of heritage sites and cultural destinations networked at a transnational level. So the transition from the presentation just you saw it is important, because it shows that how heritage can be narrated at a transnational level. And it's true, the Cultural Roots of the Council of Europe program has a unique feature. It is the only program in Europe, but I would say around the world, that is federated on this idea that we share our history, we share our heritage. We are not alone when we are narrating our own cultural experience. We are part of a larger narrative. And Cultural Roots really want to show you exactly this concept, this transnational approach to a shared European heritage. This can be takes several different forms. Can be linked to the history of our ancestors, the history of our civilizations, historic figures important for European history, but also our memory linked to landscapes, to particular typologies of our natural environment, or linked to particular type of heritage. It can be religious heritage or scientific heritage. And the ambition of the program is to create this collaborative networks that are sustainable, and I'm also coming partly to respond to Silvia's question, because of the typology of methodology that they utilize, and I will come back to this in a few moments. But I want to scroll down to show you the various thematic, the wealth of themes that the Cultural Roots of the Council of Europe program have been certifying over the years. And this brings me to the organization, the Council of Europe, that is responsible for managing the program that I represent here today. As you know, the Council of Europe is quite unique in Europe. It's the oldest international organization, born after the Second World War. It is much larger than the European Union. It really encompasses, I would say, the vast majority of the European continent. Switzerland is a very esteemed member of our organization since 1963. We, as a matter of fact, also have an office in Geneva of the Council of Europe. Of course, the Council of Europe has many different hats. One of the main responsibility of the Council of Europe is to protect and promote human rights, democracy, and rule of law. And if you have listened to the media recently, Switzerland has been in the media for a particular case brought to the European Court of Human Rights recently on climate change and whether the public sphere should be responsible for guaranteeing protection in this regard. So we have a number of legal bodies, but also the Council of Europe has been, from the very beginning, interested in promoting a sense of European identity, collective, a sense of shared citizenship around our history, but also around our values and cultural diversity, intercultural dialogue, but also the protection of the environment and the protection of our natural resources have been always at the forefront of the idea. Why the Cultural Roots program is sustainable? In what sense? I won't give you all the best practices of the 48 Cultural Roots that the Council of Europe has certified since its beginning. But I want to put the emphasis on the methodology of why this program is really unique and ensures that these kind of networks are not only developed over time, but they make an impact at local level and at European level. So behind the cultural roots of the Council of Europe program, we have our member states. And these are the member states that are part of the program. And this is important because behind the cultural roots of the Council of Europe, there are networks that are created at local level. They are bottom-up approached entities. The member states provide support. And this is very important because behind the program we have the ministries of culture, the ministries of tourism, Minister of Foreign Affairs, the national government. But the cultural roots are very active at local level. I have shown you the variety of themes: art, architecture, history, landscape. But they are very, very active at national level. And this is the case of Switzerland. And you might not know that there are almost a dozen cultural roots that are actively working in Switzerland with members, network members, heritage sites, museums, cultural institutions that are crisscrossing your country. So it is true that it's a European program, but it's very also anchored at national level and at local level, because if we go to the local level, we find a reality that is linked to particular sites that are members of the roots. And if I choose a country, by chance I'm choosing Switzerland. We can see that there are 52 cultural roots sites in Switzerland. And if we go down at the local level, here they are. These are all the sites in Switzerland that belong to the cultural roots of the Council of Europe. Some are regions, local authorities or museums, cultural institutions. Some are this is a cafe, because one of the cultural roots of the Council of Europe is the European route of historic cafes. So we have the Via Habsburg, the European route of Cistercian abbeys, the industrial heritage with the Iron Library Foundation. You might not have known. We have abbeys that are part also of the pilgrimage routes such as the Via Francigena with local authorities that are members. So you see the wealth of this cultural roots program at the local level. This ensures sustainability, because when you have the implications of the local authorities, of the municipalities on the ground, you can ensure that the program is sustainable in terms of his management. And that is why it is important to show this aspect. We have a representative of the cultural roots of the Council of Europe here today, Inger Arlevi. She is representative of the Hansa. I want to show you the Hansa. Just one second. And the Hansa is a historic, I would say, cultural root of the Council of Europe, certified in 1991. With a very historic medieval, but also federative idea of trade and commerce in the countries that you can see federated here. The Hansa is interesting because it can also show you the sustainability of the program over time. Certified in 1991, the Hansa has been recertified through a regular process of certification that happens every 3 years. So the sustainability is also shown by the methodology that works. And why does it work? Because these networks are associations, and this is one of the keys aspect of the sustainability, the fact that they are self-managing bodies that are legally registered in one of the member states of the Council of Europe. The Hansa is registered in Germany, in the city of Lübeck, with this statutory governance that is managed from Germany. But it has, Inge will correct me, over 200 members Europe-wide in terms of cities that belong to the Hanseatic League. Why the sustainability of this methodology? Because, first of all, there is a legal entity. Second is bottom-up from the local authorities. It has a transnational perspective. I should mention that the cultural roots of the Council of Europe program are defined by this transnational network with at least 3 countries of the Council of Europe represented. So to be European, a cultural root needs to have at least 3 member states of the Council of Europe. They are self-governed and also self-financed. And this is also part of the sustainability of the whole methodology. Cultural roots manage their own resources, they raise their own membership fees, and they are dynamic networks. So you can see here the countries represented, but this is not the end of the story. What is interesting to show is that these networks expand over time, or sometimes shrink over time, in the sense that each cultural root is a collection of actors that work together over time. In the case of Switzerland, today we have 51 network heritage member sites, but it could be 53, 60, 100 next year, because there is an evolution of the cultural roots. And importantly, the program is open to new cultural roots applying for certification. So there is a regular evaluation of all these 48 cultural roots, but every year new candidate routes apply for certification. Some of the latest certifications are linked to some material and immaterial heritage. The Historic Cafes route, the European Fairy Tale route, and the Women Writers route are the 3 latest certified networks. So I wanted to show you this variety of themes because I wanted to show you a complementary concept of cultural heritage in Europe that is a more transnational and more, let's say, collaborative approach, instead of having the classic local-based, national-based approach to cultural tourism. And all these routes tell a story, and that is why it is such a powerful tool. They tell a story, a European story, but, and this is important, also a local story, a national story, showing how each and every local community contributes to a wider narrative, be it the European route of historic gardens, of the route of Reformation, or Liberation route Europe, or the Impressionism's route. Every single destination has a story to tell. So this is what I think it's important to bring home as a lesson. But, and this comes to, let's say, the second part of my presentation, there is also a very strong link to the sustainability of the activities of the cultural routes. And I'm going to give you some example. Without going to enter into much detail, but I'll be happy to answer to your questions. Most of these cultural routes go through rural areas. So some are pilgrimage trails, Santiago de Compostela, the Via Francigena, Stevenson, St. Olaf Ways. All these routes go through our countryside. And that is, to me, a very important message in terms of sustainability, because they touch less known destinations. We're not talking about major sites. We're talking about small villages, small heritage sites. We talk about off the beaten track cultural heritage. They provide an economy to the local communities, because these flux of travelers bring resources. And also, importantly, they create a more diffuse type of tourism. We know how tourism can get concentrated very, very often. These routes diffuse the flows. And that is not only in terms of seasonality, because you can travel some of these routes. Some are itineraries, like the Iron Curtain Trail is a bike path of 10,000 kilometers from the Nordic Sea to all the way down to Turkey. But they can be traveled more or less, through also sustainable ways of transportation by bicycle. Some of these routes are cyclable paths, some are hiking paths, and some can be traveled by train. Some of our routes are networks of destination, like the Hanseatic League of Cities. So alternative ways of tourism. You do not fly from an Hanseatic city to another. You take the train, you don't fly on the Santiago de Compostela pilgrimage, you don't take a cruise to do that either. And so it's a different type of experience. What is also interesting is that these routes are also very much in touch with the local populations. Again, the example of the Hansa is for me interesting. There is many activities on the Hanseatic League in terms of artistic practices, youth exchanges, and there is one festival every year. And Inger had invited me to come to the festival in the Netherlands, and the whole city comes together. And the whole town brings all its citizens to participate in the activity of the Hanseatic Festival, because everybody feels historically attached to it, feels that we're part of the same heritage and tradition. So there is very much this local community type of engagement. And I'm sure in Switzerland, the Via Francigena are going through some of the Swiss villages. There is this link also to the local populations, that they come out when the travelers are walking by, and there is an exchange. So there is an appropriation of the cultural message at the local level. And that is very good news. In Switzerland, you have a huge tradition of local democracy. So, Switzerland doesn't have to be taught about the importance of but some of the countries in Europe, you've seen the geography of the Council of Europe, are very eager to learn about involving the civil society, involving the local populations, involving the local authorities, because they are very centralized, or they have a very strong, let's say, governmental imposition on their way of life. So this is a model that for Switzerland might be not so relevant, because you are very much ahead in this thinking. But for many countries in Europe, we can think about Southeast Europe, we can think about Eastern Europe, we can think about the Caucasus and other countries. It's a very important message, empowering the local at the local level. And this is also a way for us, Council of Europe, to talk to the governments, and that is important. So this is what I want to give you as an overview of the program, and for me it is something that the message for me is that when you think of all your own initiatives and your own activities, always think also that there's a bigger perspective, there is a broader sense that you can think of. It's the wider European level, and eventually also wider international level, and that is something that should be reminded. Sustainability is about also the methodology of the activities that we implement, also the type of activities, the local involvement, the local economy, and the type of tourism that the Council of Europe wants to promote. It's local, it's authentic, it's based on experiences, it's based on the values that that Europe wants to propose. All these are concepts that I think are going to be increasingly important. They are already important today. The young generations have a different concept of tourism, a new concept. This is the future of tourism. So always think, with a broader perspective in mind. Thank you very much.
Good. So we are coming to a conclusion. So we have one last speaker, Eugene Jo. Please come on stage. So Eugene is the program manager of a capacity building program that has been launched by ICROM. ICROM is the International Center for the Study of the Preservation and Restoration of Cultural Property. If I'm not wrong, you just started the second edition of this program. So the intervention of Eugene will deal with measurement and specifically with the assessment of impact of interventions. In our case of sustainability interventions at sites, this is the case of heritage sites. So impact assessment and heritage sites.
Thank you very much, Sylvia. I always have trouble remembering what my organization's acronym stands for. It's quite a bit of a mouthful, and it doesn't match the acronym. It used to be called the International Conservation Center Rome, which got abbreviated into ICROM. It's an intergovernmental organization that sits in Rome, Italy, and it's an advisory body to the World Heritage Committee. And contrary to our sister advisory bodies, ECOMOS and IUCN, we don't deal with nominations, so we're very less known. A lot of the sites that want to be nominated and inscribed on the World Heritage List usually deals with ECOMOS and IUCN if they are nature or culture sites. We actually concentrate more on working with already inscribed sites, on capacity building, on research, and trying to find policy trends and see what measures are possibly provided to those sites and site managers. We specifically target site managers, mostly mid-level working professionals. We recognize that the heritage field over the past years has expanded so greatly, and the concept of heritage itself is so different from what we considered heritage from 50, 60 years ago, and that the level of professionals that are working at heritage sites are not necessarily equipped with all the different knowledge that they actually need on site to manage all these complex problems. So we're very much focused on providing working professionals sort of short-term capacity building opportunities, training programs, courses, and workshops to make sure that they can keep the learning ongoing. And it's in that vein that I will start talking about the topic. And I have to apologize, I am actually not a specialist in tourism at all. And I've been learning a lot this morning about all the various facets and the walks and the talks of tourism, which is actually quite fascinating because I realized that essentially we're talking about the same things. And for a very long time, people working in heritage, because heritage is so heavily impacted by tourism, mostly we always like to focus on the negative parts, so we say we're the lesser fortunate brothers of tourism, being very heavily impacted by tourism. We kind of have a school of thoughts in heritage where professionals either talk about tourism or we don't talk about tourism. And a lot of our sector's conversations have been very much focused on, okay, we know that there's tourism, but let's not deal with that right now. We've got enough problems of our own kind of mentality. We're very, very slowly trying to break away from that. Heritage for a long time has been considered as something so fragile, so something that we absolutely need to protect and defend. And the mentality has been a very defensive mentality that we need to sort of freeze and protect it in its original form, in its authenticity. And however, even from the start of the World Heritage Convention in 1972, the premise of getting to a convention was under the understanding that actually heritage is very susceptible to change, and it also changes with different changing social and economic needs. And we have to understand that the entire heritage sector, which sort of started out from the far left, with monuments and sites where we really concentrated on the aspects of conservation of material fabric. Nowadays, we're talking about heritage in general. There's the collaboration, the integration of natural and cultural elements in all types of heritage. We can talk about a cultural site with buildings, but all the materials come from nature. It's actually our perception of nature that we find either beautiful or as a landscape. And it's really intertwined to an effect that we cannot divide up these specific places as either a natural place or a cultural place. It's an amalgamation of everything in it, and people are at the very center of it. It really depends on what kind of values that we've attributed to this place, why we consider these places to be important, and then the physical elements and the processes and the demonstrations of the things are the attributes that show us why this is important. And this is basically the concept of outstanding universal value where we say that in order to protect World Heritage, unless we take a values-based approach and a people-centered approach, it's going to be very difficult to protect the heritage that we've inscribed on a list that we've proclaimed that is so unique for the entire world. The way that we perceive values have been evolving a lot within the heritage sector as well, and this is the most recent values assessment report published by IPBES, where it's concentrating on most of nature's values, but really showcasing that nature as we understand it actually comes from our own cultural perceptions, and the way that we view nature can be so different and diverse depending on where we come from and what kind of perspective that we have. And it's not just living from and living in and living with and living as, and it's all those different perceptions that we need to acknowledge and to understand that how we view ourselves in this whole world of the natural environment really also dictates how we choose to protect them and the methodologies that we adopt to practice it. And of course, we talk about cultural heritage mostly as buildings, as archaeological sites, as attractions that we may go and see and feel slightly satisfied by seeing a novel thing that we haven't actually seen before. But at the base of all heritage, all cultural heritage, is that it's made by people, and it's been there for a reason that people needed to create it. And it's on the basis of understanding why it was there, why it was created from the first place, and why people still choose to value it. And that understanding of why is so crucial in understanding how to protect these sites, and why we keep talking about values-based approaches. And even in the outstanding universal value statements of World Heritage Sites, it recognizes that heritage sites themselves are not static. They are an ever-changing, evolving being where processes are still ongoing. People are living in it. There are changes that are there. It's not a frozen landscape or a thing. And the way that we are able to understand its relationships and interactions really matter, so that whatever changes that we may impose on those heritage sites, we can manage them. It's not to say no to the changes. We need to know how to manage these changes so that whatever other changes that we make on the heritage sites, we can also make sure that they don't interact in an unpredictable way, as we saw with the 3 pans of pendulums. Over the 50 years of the World Heritage Convention, obviously lots of data has been collected. This is an analysis of 30 years worth of data collected on state of conservation reports of World Heritage. And you'll understand why we consider tourism to be our sort of enemy, because it's a lot of buildings and developments and social cultural uses of heritage put together, which were all sort of branded under the whole development of tourism, that has posed a lot of managerial issues for heritage sites in the past. But at the same time, we know that tourism is actually not the culprit of problems. It's actually how we manage tourism. Tourism can be a very positive thing, and it just shows, it features in both negative and positive factors. And this is from a periodic reporting report. Periodic reporting is a 6-yearly monitoring system that operates within the World Heritage Convention, where all sites need to go through a self-assessment process to understand what are the most pressing factors and challenges that they face as a region. And from Europe, obviously, we had interpretative and visitation facilities, tourism and visitor management, and society's valuing of heritage, all sort of featuring in top factors, both negative and positive, that affect sites. And every time that we try to go through different understanding of what kind of factors really pressurizes sites, tourism is always there, and it's one of the key areas that site managers have the most difficulty dealing with, because we're not equipped with the right kind of tools, right kind of understanding, nor the right kind of governance setups to be able to play a role in it. We have lots of good examples of how heritage and tourism can positively impact each other, where heritage conservation also provides lots of social benefits for local government, local community members. And this is a slide that I've borrowed from a colleague who participated in one of our courses, but also our forum from Georgetown in Malaysia, where the heritage seed funds actually go into providing community members sustained ways of conserving their own living abodes, but also contributing to conservation. And that by going through that process and being able to participate in tourism in a better way has provided better incentives and that emotional motivation and pride and sort of conviction that they're doing the right thing with improved quality of life. Major, massive infrastructure developments. This is a site in Korea in the middle of the city where an old expressway was demolished and they actually regenerated the entire city center area with a restoration of an old stream that was initially covered up with that road. It was a wonderful project and it brought out so many different social, economic, and environmental benefits, but they missed out the crucial element of studying about heritage beforehand. They could have added so much layers of historic heritage layers to be incorporated into that project had that been considered at the forefront, and missed out on a very big opportunity. Rectifications were made later on, where now there's a museum with all the artifacts collected and trying to restore a lot of the historic layers again. But then if it had been done previously, prior to any kind of design of the project, it would have actually been much better. And of course, the social uses of the social impacts of tourism that creates pressure on heritage, and we need not go far with Venice, where the arrival of COVID saw massive decreases in numbers of arrivals to Venice, which caused a lot of economic problems and social problems, with just really impactful photos showing us how vastly different it is. And I think we're pretty much back to that former photo already in Venice these days. But that it gives us back the notion of how sustainable, environmentally sustainable tourism has to be in order to be able to answer to these three pillars of sustainability. And again, these are all slides borrowed and provided by site managers on the ground who have done all these active work in trying to measure and protect their sites to the best of their abilities. When we talk about people being involved, it's actually not an option for many heritage sites. We don't even need to go to the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, but also about the local people. For some of them, being involved in the tourism issues is not a stake, it's not an interest, it's a right. Because it's their living place. It's about how they live and how they go about in their daily lives. And for them, it's a part of their identity, it's part of their history, and it's part of their entire knowledge system and how they operate. And for them to be considered as one of the many stakeholders around the table is already a very limiting experience to talk about these opportunities and how they can participate. And within the heritage sector, we've actually established another category of people who need to be involved in heritage management, which are rights holders. And rights-based approaches to heritage management is becoming a very, very big issue. But as I go into the premises of this forum, and I realize that I'm the last speaker, so it's all up to me that when we go back home is, depending on how I finish this talk. All of these words actually are the same as we say in heritage. And I realize that heritage and tourism actually need to go hand in hand. We need to break out the sectorial silos and very much talk together, because with tourism working with heritage and heritage working with tourism, we can actually become allies to talk about sustainable measures. We can talk about bringing justification and having stronger conviction of what we can achieve. And considering the different actors that need to be involved at the property level when we do different training courses and activities with site managers, so local communities and and residents and young people and local authorities that have to be fully involved to these governance arrangements so that they can talk about the changes, making changes into chances. And here is where we would like to really advocate the use of impact assessment processes for any kind of tourism interventions. And impact assessment, of course, we know that usually applies to large-scale infrastructure developments. It's the environmental impact assessments that we're very used to. But because heritage, we're talking a lot about small-scale sites as well, objects and monuments as well. The World Heritage Center, the UNESCO, ICRAM, IUCN, ICOMOS, all the statutory bodies of the World Heritage Convention got together to produce a new guidance and toolkit on impact assessments in a World Heritage context, because we realized that it's not always has to be that EIA level of interventions that we're talking about. And it's merely suggesting a process of thinking before we actually put anything into action. And the process of thinking is fairly simple, where we try to establish a step-by-step guidance that people can follow easily. And also, by having that established process, it also gives the heritage managers a possibility to intervene at the right moments, to insert themselves into a right kind of process, established process, so it's easier for them to navigate as well. And it depends on whether they're part of the state party or whether they contribute to the impact assessment team, or by the approval authorities of issuing out different approvals for interventions, but that in the baseline assessment of the heritage values, this is where heritage absolutely needs to be considered in the entirety of the environment, so that when regional level tourism plans are being made, that the government actually can undertake strategic environmental assessments that take into consideration the heritage needs as well, as much as possible, so that heritage can also be prepared for all of these changes, and they are equipped with the right kind of tools. And that if, in these kind of sustainable strategies, certain kind of infrastructure changes are also required of heritage sites, they know what type of assessments that they need to be processing as well, and how to contribute in them. So that already from the conceptual and the planning stages of strategies and interventions, heritage can also contribute in designing and planning of these strategies, so that at a later stage, when it's under operation or construction, they don't get negatively impacted. And this all comes from the understanding that we're not talking about heritage with strict boundaries of World Heritage. We understand that tourism or any other impact actually comes more from the outside. And yet heritage people are only equipped with legislation and governance measures that pertain to the inside of heritage, when a lot of pressure comes from the outside. So we've adopted this heritage place approach, where we need to identify all the actors and the people and the communities that we do need to interact with. And tourism sector is one major sector that the heritage sector needs to get better at communicating and talking about common goals and objectives. And heritage is already equipped with all of these narratives and reasons why we need to keep it going. And it already feeds into the cultural roots, it already feeds into the different cultural dimensions, the experiences that tourism wants to promote. It already has those aspects of what kind of landscape it provides, what kind of attributes you can actually promote in your tourism plans and strategies and routes, that it's really a matter of using what's available, I think, that is already provided from the heritage sector, as well as communicating better. And really, the 4 key questions that we ask for any kind of intervention: is it necessary? Already trying to see if there is a demand from the onset of any kind of intervention. What kind of modality? If we need more transportation, should it be train? Should it be planes? Should it be cars? Should it be railways? What's the modality? Where should it go? And when and what form should it take place? And these don't only pertain to infrastructure development, but to really all types of interventions that we can think about in terms of creating tourism routes. And of course, participation being the key to all of this, engaging the right kind of people at appropriate moments through diverse methodologies is always encouraged, so that we can actually proactively solve all the problems, not always say no to any kind of proposals. So by going through a sort of a structured methodology, we can't 100% predict what is going to happen. Obviously, that's not possible, and we cannot assure that we will know that it will have either a 100% negative or a 100% positive impact. But at the same time, we can reduce the gap of not knowing, and we can reduce the gap of making mistakes so that we have a better chance of improvement in the next round. And the heritage sector is also trying our best to develop different approaches to sustainable tourism with different toolkits, but we're missing out on a lot of details of how we can talk with the tourism sector, and perhaps that's another way that we can work better on and providing each other inputs. So just a very, very short summary of all the different points that we've encountered in terms of dealing with both impact assessments, but also decision-making processes in general that could also apply to heritage and tourism. And I thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much to Eugene. So just to trying to sum up a very rich session, I identified three main, let's say, key points, the ones that I identified. I'm sure that you might have different ones and more key points. So one, I think, is communication, meaning that we can speak, of course, of benefits, so which are the benefits we can give to tourists in order to improve their experience, benefits that are sustainable. But a lot depends on what we tell to tourists, to visitors. A lot depends on the stories that we tell them. From the stories, it depends their understanding of what they are visiting. So communication plays a central role in all this sustainability discourse. The second point is the relation between nature and culture that is not given, is not fixed, but changes. And actually, it really opened my mind what I have heard in this session, that I had never thought of this relationship as a not fixed and not given relationship, but the way we look at nature, it depends on our culture. Third point is the involvement of local people that should be considered more as a right than as something that can happen, but it's something that we do to the people that contributed to build, to create, or to conserve and develop a heritage. So, yeah, these were a couple of reflections from my side. You might have questions or more reflections, maybe. So I actually have a question for Stefano. You have spoken about the sustainability aspects of the program of Cultural Roots, but which are the challenges of such a big program? The challenges, and also where are you going? What are you aiming at? At just increasing in number of routes, or is there a broader horizon?
Okay.
Yep, as you prefer.
Okay. So the challenges are many. I think for me the wish is that each and every cultural roots becomes stronger in implementing its activity, its governance. That there is a growth, not only quantitative in terms of number of routes. That's not the objective. We have to remember that cultural roots grow in number based on requests that come from the different candidates. So it's not a decision that is made by the Council of Europe. The Council of Europe receives applications for certification. But the fact that the program has grown quite rapidly in the last few years shows that there is a real interest from these transnational networks to become visible at the European level and to narrate our European history. So the challenge is that each and every cultural roots develop its own network, its own relations with local authorities, with the political authorities. It has the resources necessary to grow, And also the ambition of the program is that it becomes also a brand in itself, and that the Council of Europe certification is recognized as the UNESCO or the heritage label is today. That is the, let's say, where the program is going. The challenges are also linked to let's say, ensuring that each and every network has the proper resources, and that is always, let's say, our concern, that networks have the necessary financial and human resources means to develop. But we see a very positive trend in this type of European tourism product. There is a need, a request, almost like a desire from the European travelers to be able to experience such a cultural heritage at European level. We live in a interconnected world, and the ambition, especially of young generations, is not only to travel and not only to experience their heritage destinations, but we travel to travel with meaning, to travel with a sense of purpose, a sense of being part of a community, to experience particular aspects of European history or heritage that they are interested about. So it also feeds a sense of identity for our own Europeans. So the challenge is to continue to promote this kind of message, to really create a European space where we can all exchange and continue to grow. So thank you very much.
Inga, she would like to add something to this.
Okay, Stefanie, don't worry, I will not contradict you. I fully agree with you, but I can add some practical information to this topic about sustainability and the cultural roots. We couldn't come together during the pandemic, of course. So when we met again last year outside Paris in Fontainebleau, it was the first time for a couple of years. And then we saw that the roots wanted to cooperate more. And then I asked them, I'm the coordinator, what themes were the most important for them to develop together. They were allowed to tell me 2 words. Many of them said many more words. But from that, we pointed out 3 topics that were really important. Sustainability was the first one, and then visibility and communication. And then we had a brainstorming where they could list what they meant with sustainability. And you can imagine how broad the topic was. After that, we continued at the Forum for Cultural Roots in autumn in Chania in Crete, and tried to establish, and we did establish working groups. So now one working group is dealing with sustainability, and then they have to limit really what they want us to develop together. And the result of their work, it will now be presented at our training academy in Dordogne at the end of May, beginning of June. And then to see how we can continue together to make sustainability a real leading topic for the cultural roots of the Council of Europe.
Thank you. A question based on the premise, you of course, based on the premise that tourism heavily depends on the culture and nature, but by using it, it also destroys it. So basically, tourism is killing itself. I want to know whether you at Machu Picchu have ever considered, how much tourism you need to preserve Machu Picchu, because we know it brings money to help with the preservation, and where is the tip where you basically say, the tourism will destroy in Machu Picchu? Do you have any ideas in numbers, maybe, or?
Yes, we do. There is a law that says 2244 is the highest number of people we may accept on the yachta, which is on the monumental site. But if you consider the entire area, the 37,000 hectares, theoretically, If you develop well areas where tourists can be accepted, received, where they can sleep, walk, have a real Andean experience, not the one with Inca Cola, Coca-Cola, no. They have a real Andean mountain experience, then you can have many more. Because the way the Machu Picchu landscape was conceived and constructed was not, as you may imagine, in a city opposite to the forest, opposite to the rural world. The togetherness of the pre-Hispanic sacred planning implies that mountains, plants, stones, rocks inhabit together with humans very specific places where you become one. And because of this notion, this can happen in many different sites throughout the region. So it is the wrong projection of the Western imagery of Indiana Jones and the Lost City of the Inca, which has transformed this destination into the place where you go and say, wow, I'm in the forest, which is exactly what the Inca never wanted or thought or planned. So 2244 is based on the type of pressure we have today. But ideally, we could have many, many more going through these very different paths, having a much different and more authentic experience of what it means to reconcile yourself, your family, your community, your culture with the resources. You know, the last presentation, thank you for telling us about, reminding us that World Heritage is never just cultural or natural, it's a combination of them. We, as a culture, we are endemisms, we are unique endemisms of every site that we inhabit. And the ability to create a positive negotiation with our resources is what makes us better humans and allow us to give an example to everybody else.
Who designs experiences? I mean, who allows the steps to walk on the stairs which then disappear?
Well, an Inca would tell you it's the mountain designing the path. And then the Inca would tell you that, by becoming aware of this teaching, the road is better designed and carved. But the type of experience that we conceive is now detached. This is why we insist so much about the Inca gaze of Fernando Sede or the living point of view of the community, like Heinz is trying to, tell us, not just in Machu Picchu, in the Muxic area, in the Amazon, everywhere, where he's saying the living culture is still very close to these spiritual values, which have the wondrous ability to heal everybody. So ultimately, it's really the mountains designing the path.
Maybe you were asking who does decide the route to go in the site.
Yeah.
Well, okay. Then this is the management. The management is composed by a specific functional area of the Ministry of Culture, which is a group of, I would say, 30 people between archaeologists, anthropologists, topographists, architects, historians of arts, and they're all Quechua. So when you ask them, who are the indigenous stakeholders? They tell you it's us, which is really interesting because usually indigenous communities come into conflict with management in World Heritage sites. But in this case, you have people speaking Quechua in the office, and you ask them, who are the heirs? And they say, it's us. The biologist's last name is Walparimachi. She is from a legitimate Inca family, from that same area 500 years ago. And so she doesn't feel she is alien or other by being a scientist.
I think what Adine also is interestingly pointed out is that there are these heritage sites that are a magnet for attracting so much interest and attention, but around the heritage sites there is a geography of world heritage as well that should be more discovered. And I think that many countries
in Europe and elsewhere are now developing this kind of strategy of decongestioning important sites by promoting what is around these wonderful, let's say, classic destination. I can give you examples of in the Mediterranean. There are countries like, many countries that have traditionally had a large impact on their coasts, and now there is all this. Let's say, development of inland, of rural tourism, trying also to promote the heritage and the culture that is, let's say, away from the traditional destination. And I think that there is a compatibility with the two, and I think destinations are now working on providing additional type of experiences that that can show that our continent is disseminated by heritage, and that I think is the richness. This is, I think, a message that as Council of Europe I would like to promote, that Europe is a wealth of cultural heritage, and we sometimes forget that in our villages, in our regions. There is such fantastic culture that we should own, appropriate, but also transmit and promote and be proud of. And I think that is, I think, one of the messages that the sustainability should also underline for the new generations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, I have one small, very short question, and then I can give you the word. So, because concerning this, I think it is worth if you, Eugene, can explain it in 2 words what it means capacity building, this concept.
At least within this sector of World Heritage, we moved away from training to capacity building. And a lot of the understanding is that capacity resides in every single actor involved in the process, and it's really about building their ability so that they can respond. It's not about transferring knowledge or random kind of information, but actually creating the enabling environment so that each and every one of them can play their own roles. And that's the understanding of how we're approaching capacity building, and that's why when we say heritage management courses, it's actually not just reserved for heritage managers who have that title in an official office, but it's actually about everybody who can and are contributing to the management of heritage, in many cases local community members or local associations, NGOs, that also play a very massive role in managing heritage that need to be built up in capacity. That's the individual level of capacity building. We also talk about institutional capacity building. As I pointed out, a lot of our legislations regarding heritage are still in the antiquity state. They still deal with only monuments or objects or important buildings. They don't think about the surrounding environment. They don't talk about impacts coming from the outside or thinking about measures how to deal with it. So the heritage manager has all these pressures coming from the outside without any kind of tools to actually be able to respond to it. And what's more, compared to tourism, heritage doesn't even have the budget, nor the human resources. Perhaps one of the key reasons why we initially considered tourism to be detrimental to heritage was that many of the local governments would eagerly hire tourism officers in their local municipality government offices by eliminating out heritage officers, because they kind of saw, what's the point, we can make more money by having tourism officers rather than having heritage officers who will say no to everything, So that's part of the understanding of making sure that we can build up capacities of individuals, but there's a limit as to how much change they can bring about, and change actually has to come from an institutional level and from a governmental level where, with proactive intention, the way that we operate has to change in order to change individual behaviors.
Thank you very much. So I think we have one last question.
Well, it's basically just a comment, my experience, not being related to heritage, but working in tourism. I think I've never been to Machu Picchu, but the latest sacred site that I visited was pyramids in Loja. So what I think is we need to start designing experiences. What we as a tourist now have available is basically just see the site. Now, seeing the site is completely different from experiencing the site. For example, I could go for a €300 tour to Luxor, but at the end of the day, there were 60 buses at the site. So, I was just, one of the tourists, and it was awful, basically. With tombs, pyramids, but terrible. Yeah, so I think, we need to go from visiting, seeing the sites, to experiencing the sites.
Wonderful. So I think that it's time to go home. So maybe a couple of last words and we can conclude.
Thank you very much. Silvia, I prepared 120 slides.
Tomorrow maybe.
Thank you so much. I think just trying to summarize in a few words. So, thank you. Really, I'm really indebted to every single presenter today. I mean, this is a topic which has been kind of, let's say, captured by end of the world narratives or black and white approaches. So providing really a nuance and in-depth understanding of the topic. So it's a rich and complex issue. Don't forget culture. Be sure. I mean, this is our, let's say, topic in our UNESCO chair. So besides economy, society, and environment, culture should be there and even at the real very foundation of the sustainability discourse. It requires measures, ideally shared measures. Many interventions have stressed this element, and transparent labels if needed. They should be transparent, understandable, and clear. And extensive research, again, just to justify our existence. Otherwise, investing, what should we do? Should include travelers, locals, and professionals. Very important, so tourism is a matter of all of them, including, of course, the heritage itself. I like the image offered by Eduardo. So there are clearly needed ingredients. So we can list some needed ingredients, but definitely there is no one-fits-all recipe. So you can cook, and you need to cook them in different ways depending on the different conditions, depending on the different places. It's a step-by-step process, like we have learned from many different presentations. And it should include education of all individual stakeholders, every single stakeholders, including tourists themselves. And it needs adequate and inspiring storytelling, and as well as orchestration of digital media, which have been mentioned all throughout the presentations, even if they haven't been put at the center, apart from the presentation from Dr. Anna Pico-Schwender. So, thank you so much, and let's enjoy the apero. Thank you to the colleagues and friends from the MBBI Foundation and all the presenters, and thank you so much.
Before everyone goes off to the apero, we would just like to take a group picture so you can remain sitting, and we'll have someone come here and take a quick